This one's going to be a little bit different because this one is for the patrons. You see, our patrons help support the channel, and every once in a while when the funding has accumulated enough, I put it to a vote to the patrons. What do you guys want to see? And that lets us open up and expand to companies that I wouldn't necessarily think of, companies that don't want to work with the channel. They've got something they're not comfortable with about the way that we do things here, or just what the patrons want to see. And in this case, literally in this case, is a CZ75BD thanks to our patrons. So if you guys appreciate seeing videos that are completely free from manufacturer influence or pressures, please comment "thank you patrons" down below and consider becoming one of our patrons. Coming up next is a tabletop review and field strip of a gun that's been around for almost 50 years and yet never on this channel. That's because I don't do much with CZ, but this is what folks wanted to see. Coming up, you'll see as standard what comes in the box. We'll take a look at some notes from the manual, fit, finish, and features, field strip the thing, check for chamber support, and I'll tell you what'll be in the range video. All coming up next on GBGuns. I personally need to thank the patrons for this opportunity. CZ doesn't like working with the channel. I've done CZ75 based firearms before, but not one of the actuals. And while this is a very dated design, it's still in production. And as a handgun guy, I think it's time I had experience with it. So thank you patrons for making this choice and making this possible. Also, as a note, you'll see with these two magazines that have the stoppers on them, I decided to make our friends behind enemy lines outside of the constitutional United States, i.e. California, happy and pick up a 10-round model. Don't worry though, I got some proper capacity magazines separately, so we'll have full capacity also in the shooting review. Now, this is not meant to be a historical story of the CZ75, but it has been around since 1976 in various forms. I opted for the BD model, which B was the improvement from the initial, and then the D is that this has a decocker, because I figure if you're going to have a hammer, you might as well have DASA. Box is a pretty clean presentation. We've got a plastic cleaning rod, not good for knocking out squibs, just keep that in mind, and a nylon brush. We have two magazines, in this case 10-rounder magazines. Don't see any manufacturer numbers on them, but the full capacity ones that I picked up were from Metgar, and of course, just to gamble, picked up a Pro Mag. Up top we have our federally mandated lock and a rather beefy manual. Notes from the manual coming up next. You guys know I do the manual for multiple reasons. One, I see a manual as an indicator of the pride that the company has in the product, how well they want you to understand the product. Because, in a sense, and I've seen it on plenty of YouTube videos, I'm sure you guys have too, most of the times that people have a bad time with a firearm, they're not doing something right. So if you put it all clearly in the manual, then it's just an idiot user, not the manufacturer's fault. This manual is in multiple languages because the CZ75 is in service and has been in service around the world, so smart of that. English starts on page 16. No images, so your reading comprehension skills need to be there, along with a little imagination. It does have quite a bit of warning about tritium sights, which I thought was an interesting detail. That might be an EU standard thing, but I've not seen it many places. And the other bit that I always get asked about is ammunition. All it says is to make sure that the ammunition is CIP, which is the European Proof House Authority, or SAMI, which is the US, approved, which would mean plus P, because plus P is included in SAMI specs. However, this is a 4.6 inch barrel, so we have no need for plus P ammunition. Will we run it in the range view? I don't know, we'll see how we're feeling that day. One historical bit that I do want to toss in here is this CZ, although produced modernly, this is a 2023 production by the modern CZ company, is not quite the same company as the CZ of yesteryear that had all of the groundbreaking technologies and alternative methods, like this VZ52. This is a roller-locked pistol. Really cool setup. The VZ52 rifle, which we've also got and reviewed, also has a unique and brilliant design to it. Lots of cool things came out of the old CZ, and this being sort of towards the end of handgun design from the old CZ, I guess you could say, I was curious to take a look at it. That and the historical role. I mean, this thing is kind of, I don't know if I want to draw a parallel, but this has served all over the world for many, many years. So it's got its own historical value as well. And one other bit, while researching just to learn a little bit about this, the wiki description describes it as one of the original Wonder Nines, and I couldn't help but see, especially after the guy at the gun shop said it, now I can't unsee it, that the CZ75 is very much Browning high power, both in design cues and in action. You even got the rounded hammer there. There's a lot of things that are pretty similar between the two of these. Of course, the Browning high power was developed decades earlier, and so stuff like having a decocker was not included on these high powers. Now on to our standard tabletop of fit, finish, and features. Watch the slide back to the rear. We can see we're empty here, and we'll see if we have magazine release or ejection. And we have ejection. That's something I like to see. That little hop there, that's a little extra kick to get the mag out with a metal body and metal side. And this is a heavy gun at 2.5 pounds. The magazine should drop free. I will use these really restricted state mags in the review, but of course also the full-size ones that we got after the fact. Opening the slide on these things, and this is a personal thing, and like I said, this video is going to be a bit different. I'm going to give a little more thoughts and feels. The slide in frame setup, meaning that the slide is resting inside of the frame instead of outside of the frame like it does on most other guns, is not something I particularly like. It reduces the surface area of the slide, so you have less to grab onto to rack. Additionally, if you overshoot or you have large fingers, like 1 digit of my finger is, see, I'm going to rest my joint on that edge there. 1 digit of my finger is more than twice the length of the slide. So if you grab, when you grab to pinch, most of your pinching force is applied at the end of your finger by the bone. And what can happen there is if you miss, or you've got too much finger grabbing onto the frames of the slide, you end up trying to wrench the gun out of your hand rather than grabbing the slide. Not a problem for people with small fingers, not a problem if you spend a lot of time training with it, but it does mean that moving over to one of these designs could require some shift in training. Another aspect that I've got to say, because it needs to die, this is not a low bore axis. Simply moving the rails to the inside of the frame to give you a shorter visual frame is not lowering the bore at all. It's right where it would be. And if we moved the slide to grip the outside of the frame, making the slide that much taller, so you've got room to grab on things, then people would say it's a high bore axis gun. It's something that is, I think, lore and a misunderstanding that has perpetuated ad nauseum. No, the CZ75 is not low bore axis simply because the slide looks shorter. Now, what running the slide inside the frame can do is force more material to be used on the frame, which we've got here because this all needs to be closed. So you end up with a better weight ratio of slide to frame if you don't have full rails on the slide, which these do. I say better weight ratio because the more weight you have down here relative to up here, typically the better recoil control you feel because the amount of weight shifting up here is relatively less than the frame. So just something I had to go over, had to get it off my chest. I'm so tired of hearing it and seeing it because people, especially the internet, preach things like they're fact when they are indeed not. All right, coming up to the front of the gun, you can see we have nice tight fitment. This uses the kidney bean style Browning action, so the barrel does not tilt much. See, it stays relatively very straight. I like that. That's less weight shifting in hand. That can help make for a smoother recoil impulse. Very narrow front end, and as I showed, very much that high power style of shape up here. Reducing weight off the nose can help with nose swing. However, unsprung weight up here is what ends up with making for a flat shooter. So if we had a full length dust cover, this would probably shoot quite a bit flatter. Another thing that can be misleading with this is you see this and it looks like a pinch spot to be able to rack the gun like on a lot of modern firearms. However, once again, you'll get hit by the edge of the frame there, which is a sharp edge. And that's something that I've noticed all over this. There are lots of 90-degree or near 90-degree sharp edges there, so be cautious when racking. This is not a dig on CZ. This is what was produced in the 70s, and they're just still making it. So I'm sure many improvements could be made on this. I was interested in trying one of the more modernized models, but the patron task was something classic, SIG 226 or CZ75, and the votes went to CZ75. Speaking of era correct, we don't have any rail up here because accessories weren't a thing yet. I do like that we have nice serrations here for the European style of a finger forward grip. In fact, there's even a little ledge in here to really help you hook in there to grip that way. Another nice smart thing is you notice this kind of kidney bean shape to the trigger guard. That's because as a double action, single action pistol, your space in front of the trigger when in double action gets smaller, but that high cut there kind of scoops and brings your finger in, and fortunately that is not one of the sharp edges. There is, however, a sharp edge on this trigger. I noticed at the bottom, it may just be the way my hand fits on it, but not the most comfortable. However, the trigger is rather nice. We'll go through it and do our trigger talk now. You can see where in the decocked position, the hammer is not all the way down as it would be if it was fired. So since it's meant to be just decocked, this does not have a manual safety other than decocking it. That double action pull is actually pretty good. We've got some spring-loaded resistance before it firms up, and pretty smooth through with no defined wall. It just kind of lets go and breaks, much like a well-tuned revolver, which would make sense since during the time this came about, most law enforcement and military were transitioning off of revolvers or were familiar with them. With that gun and the hammer cocked, we're now in single action. Our reset is of moderate length, but can be felt and definitely heard, and that takes us in front of kind of a wall for a rolling break. A nice trigger indeed, certainly for duty purposes. Magazine release is not reversible, but could be, and you can see the magazines these days are now cut for ambi, probably because there's other models that have reversible magazine releases. The front strap is completely smooth. That is kind of a miss. I wish it had some horizontal serrations like they did include on the trigger guard. They just didn't down here because this is very smooth. Underneath, we do not have any sort of beveling. This is from an era when people just trained to reload better. I guess. Plus the fact that I point out in every video that a double stack single feed magazine is an inverse magwell. Just train. Grips on this are hard plastic but feel nice. They do have a slight indentation right here, which for me rests my thumb down low. Unless you're doing the modern two-handed grip, then you can rest your thumb up on top of this ledge and use that cut to rest the meat of your hand, which is pretty comfy. My hand happens to overshoot here to get to the trigger, but if I had smaller hands, my trigger finger might reach right through that path. So that is a smart design. The back strap does not have any texture either. That's another spot that I think could be a miss, at least by modern standards. And then we have this rather short beaver tail. This is the part that concerns me about the range. It is short and relatively narrow and has sharper edges. These edges here there's a little bit of chamfering to them and it looks smooth, but you can also see that shine right there. That's where the sharp spots are, and I'm going to probably feel that while shooting. Good thing it's just a 9mm, so recoil shouldn't be too bad. Slide frame, of course, is pretty darn tight. We have some play up front, that's fine. Good and tight in the back. What really matters is the barrel lockup, which is very tight. Our sight picture, they are not tritium, they are not night sights. They don't glow, but they have a greenish color to them, which is better than white. So I accept that. They've also made sure that the front is clearer and brighter than the rear, which is something that I like. good combat style sights, and of course with a gun that's been in production for 50 plus years, there's lots of aftermarket availability to them. Coming around the right side of the gun, sorry lefties, this is a communist era gun. There's no tolerance for lefties. You'll have to be like me. You may or may not know, I am left-handed. I just shoot right because that's how most guns come. It was easier for me to train my right hand than it is to look for guns catering to being left-handed. I'm also left-eyed. I just shoot with my right eye by closing my left eye, because when only your right eye is open, that's your dominant eye. Medical miracle taught to you right here on GBGuns. Next, we'll field strip the CZ75 BD and take a look inside the gun. Field stripping a CZ75 requires some visual acuity and some daylight. And before you say that's a ding or a fail on the gun design, I ask you, if you don't have visual acuity or daylight, what are you really doing taking the gun apart in the first place? So as we zoom in on the slide, you'll see those little hash marks there, those little cuts on the slide and frame. Those need to be lined up, and then we're going to push on this pin from the other side to pull out our slide stop lever. Doing that can require a bit of force, but there is a trick for it. So holding that there, and what I do is use my thumb in the trigger guard and my hand on the front of the slide to hold it in place. Get over here and push. These can loosen up over time, but they can also be tough to start. Fortunately, it protrudes, and you can use something like your magazine to get it started. Then, while keeping that lined up, some wiggling back and forth, and that removes your pin. With that out of the way, the slide comes right off the frame after we release the trigger. There we go. And you can see inside our frame. You can see we've got all the slide rail in the world. Now, I know a lot of people like having full-length rails. I used to be in that school of thought as well and thinking it was great, until I also realized that that allows no egress point for grit. Anything that gets in there is going to get trapped and run back and forth. That to me sounds like something that would make a gun prone to locking up or poor performance when really dirty. However, the CZ75 has an excellent track record. So tell me which theory is correct. But everything looks pretty clean. Interesting threaded screw in there above our magazine release spring. And now to get our slide apart, since it's a Browning action, things aren't too different. We do have an uncaptured spring on a short guide rod and a round coil spring, not a flat spring. I bet DPM Systems probably has something awesome for these. Guide rod does appear to be metal though, and you see that little point on there. That point aligns with a divot spot in the barrel, which I think is nice. That's a great way to center it. I'm sure many of you are like me. If you've field stripped guns enough times, you've come to that point where you get the guide rod on there and everything seems good, but it's just barely resting, and by the time you try to put the slide on the frame, everything comes undone. Take a look in our slide. You can see we have our drop safety and already quite a bit of finish wear on these rails and the locking mechanism. Now I have dry fired this a couple times, let's say maybe 30 times racked the gun, so that's a surprising amount of wear so quickly for a brand new gun. Probably because of all that, I don't know, when you've got increased surface area, you also have decreased pressure per unit of surface area. So why did that wear off so quickly? Curious. We'll take a look at our barrel. We do not have any chamfering on the side. We do have a long feed ramp, and we'll check for chamber fitment. Chamber fitment, we're looking to see how much, well first, how well does a round fit in there to make sure that the chamber is to spec and cleanly done. We're also checking for support. I'm doing that using some Liberty Ammunition Civil Defense. We'll drop it in, listen for a plunk, like that. Make sure it can spin freely to make sure there's no burrs or nastiness in there. And then looking to see how much of the brass beyond the shoulder is exposed. And you can see none of it. This is a fully supported chamber, which is excellent. That is a great thing should you have a case want to rupture or some type of catastrophic failure. That fully supported chamber helps keep the forces heading out the barrel and not into your hand. So bravo on that. Now as I reassemble the gun, I'll tell you by simply in reversing the disassembly process. I'll tell you what you'll see in the range video. You'll get absolute first shots through the gun. That's right, no warm-ups, no practice, no highlight reels on this channel. We turn the camera on and then start shooting, because sometimes those first rounds can be the most important ones. Then full magazine plus one. Well, I'm going to do that with these 10 rounders because I'm really curious how these limited mags work. I'm fortunate enough to live within the constitutional United States, so I don't have to worry about such restrictions violating my Second Amendment rights. But I do realize some of you out there live behind enemy lines, so we'll check these mags. Then head over to the What's for Dinner table to see what the gun eats, which could be interesting. 10 different additional rounds to the range ammunition we're using to see how it feeds, functions, and cycles in such an old design. Are there modern 9mm rounds that this gun doesn't like? That could be curious. Now, when I pulled this back, you notice just beyond where the two lines mate on the slide, maybe we're not able to see that, but we want to make sure that we've got a clear window through here to get into that kidney bean shaped locking spot on the barrel, and then bring the lines back parallel over here and push this guy all the way through. Sometimes wiggling the slide a little to get things in position while applying some pressure. There we go. Now it's together. Quick functions check, and everything's good. From there, the sights and trigger control, which should be good. This is a nice trigger, and a 4.6-inch barrel means beyond the basic 9mm performance over on our 6-inch spinner. Practical accuracy being 5 shots from 7 yards on a 1-inch square, and then concluding thoughts on these things. It certainly is not in mode with today's it must have, such as a light rail or an optics plate, but appears to be a very well-made gun. The all-steel construction makes it pretty heavy, less than ideal for carry, I guess you could say, with weight, but that heavy weight is probably going to soak up quite a bit of recoil as well. And this trigger, aside from the sharp spots, is pretty nice for a duty trigger. So difficult to grab this freaking slide. Is a good trigger. So I'm looking forward to that, and looking forward to experiencing this as a historical firearm. Might bring out some of the Season 75 based clones that we have that have some slight modernizations to them. Still not 2024 hip, but still more modern than 1975 or 76. So that should be an interesting experience. Thank you again to the patrons for affording us all this opportunity to learn and experience a piece of historical firearm. Well, a historical firearm piece. This is what I get for not scripting. Anyways, thanks again, and we'll see you guys on the range. One extra bit, because I know someone watching this has to have more knowledge about this firearm than I do, since I know next to nothing. What is that? Why is that spot exposed? That little pin there. Doesn't seem like something that should be exposed. The other side is plugged. Why is that not? Should it be? Did I get a faulty firearm? Let me know what you guys think. Thanks again.